Welcome. I'm Emily Jane Murray, and I'll be your speaker today. I'm from the Florida Public Archaeology Network, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the work that we do documenting heritage at risk using digital techniques, so terrestrial laser scanning and photogrammetry. And I do just want to pause and give a big shout out to Emma Dietrich, who used to work with me here at FPN. She ran away to Virginia. I hear it's lovely. But she definitely did a lot of the work with me, and this is actually kind of a Franken presentation of a couple different presentations that both her and I have given together. So I want to make sure I give her some shout out and credit and love for all of her hard work. I'll start with our land acknowledgement. So we work here in Northeast Florida, and this is the homes of the Timucua speaking people, but there've been lots of other indigenous people who came and stewarded the land, including the Yamasee and the Wally. And it is, of course, the home of the Seminole and the Miccosukee people who are, thriving today. We also like to acknowledge the Gullah Geechee peoples and their descendants and communities. So these are folks who were brought to work on the coastal plantations and came and had lots of different communities in the post-emancipation landscape as well. So we also just like to acknowledge their contributions and think about them as well. So I mean, heritage, we're all here because we know heritage at risk is a big problem, right? And just the amount of sites that we know could be impacted and are already being impacted. And it's just such a big thing to tackle. And I tell, the public and students and all, if we just took one banker's box from each of these sites that could be impacted, that's a lot of banker's boxes to curate and keep forever. So the realities are really that a lot of the sites will be abandoned in place. And this can be done formally. The image here is from Canaveral Air Station, and they went around, they had all these buildings that were used for space things, but also for missile launching, and they were just trying to get that thing in the air once to see if it worked out. So they weren't built to last. They weren't built, they were built to do the job, but there was no thought of, keeping these structures around forever, right? So they are on the very exposed coast of Florida, the part that sticks out as well. So they're experiencing a lot of impacts. So, the powers that be there kind of decided the best management strategy was to abandon them in place, and they have thusly labeled a lot of the structures. But they went around and did a big laser scanning and digital documentation project where they recorded every building to the best of their ability and have created all of these 3D representations. And then when the buildings go, the buildings go. So that's a great example of how to, approach abandoned in place with a very thoughtful, planned out, forward-thinking manner. But if we do nothing at sites, we are essentially abandoning them in place. So, at FPN, we do a lot of the monitoring through Heritage Monitoring Scouts, HMS Florida program. And, so we're trying to document what we can with that in mind, that, some of these sites are just going to be abandoned, but thinking about ways that we could more thoroughly document or just, get the most out of the sites while they're here, and, how to do that, balancing a lot of different aspects, permitting and curation concerns, and the resources and all. So I think the digital heritage can be a really great way to kind of solve some of those problems, or, like I say, make the most out of we have the phrase learning from loss. So acknowledging that the sites are going and trying to think about how to best document them for the future. So we use a couple different techniques. One of them is photogrammetry. So this is, and I'm just going to give some quick rundowns for those who may not know. Photogrammetry is the process of, you just take still images and you stitch them all together, and it creates a 3D model. So it's much like the old stereoscopes where you have two pictures that are kind of offset just a little, and your brain gets tricked into kind of making them three-dimensional. Except that we take hundreds of photos and we use computer brains to create that 3D representation. So this is something that's very easy. I've done models with my cell phone. I've done models, with any sort of camera. There is some inexpensive software and some open source software that you can use. You do have to put data into it, such as like the scale of things. So we'll often use a photo scale, and then you can tell in the model, the distance between the 2 points. but it's, you know, it's pretty simple and straightforward. And something, as I say, you can go home and do this afternoon. We also use laser scanning. And so there's lots of different types of laser scanners. We use a big terrestrial laser scanner. We had one that was like a small tabletop that we used for artifacts. But we had kind of an entry level one, and it just became not worth the hassle of messing with it. So they do have high quality, more expensive, fancier ones. And you know, those are great for small objects, but we largely are using a big terrestrial one for bigger landscapes. And these are great because if you think about a total station, like kind of taking one point of data, this is like a total station on steroids, taking millions of points of data, and it kind of automatically constructs that 3D representation of what it's seeing. So you do multiple scan positions to kind of, you know, get all sides of, you know, a statue, or all corners of a room, or, you know, all parts of the shoreline. There is, of course, a bigger entry into this because you have to buy the equipment or rent the equipment. And even when you buy the equipment, then you're like, oh, now I have to pay for a warranty, and I have to pay for service every year. And then they get you with the software and the software updates. And so it is a lot more costly than doing photogrammetry, but it does kind of give you, in some ways, more accurate representations, and it already has that scaling built in as well. So those are the two techniques that we use. We often do a combination of the two, especially on big, like on the site level, because you're getting such high accuracy of the kind of geometry, like the actual outlines and shapes, with the laser scanner. But the photogrammetry, you're going to get a better texture. So that's kind of the two parts to the model: is the geometry, which is the shape, and the texture, which is the imagery, the colors, you know, all that kind of gets wrapped around it. And the cameras and the laser scanners just don't take as nice of pictures as like a DSLR camera. So we'll kind of blend the two together when we do big landscapes. And for the smaller items, we usually just stick to photogrammetry. So just to plug, you know, there's some great programs that are not that expensive. There are very expensive programs, but you can get, I think all of the manipulating data post-processing programs I've listed here are open source and free. Cloud Compare is what we use to, you know, compare changes to the models through time. And I'll show some imagery from that software, but it's, you know, totally free to go and download. The two main programs, we started off using Agisoft Metashape, and if you can get educational licenses starting at $60 through that company. And then we've switched over. We do a lot more with reality capture, and you can get free educational licenses if you have a .edu. I know our colleague Meg Gilliard, you know, she works for the state, and so she asked about licenses, and they didn't give it to her for free, but she got a pretty steep discount. So, you know, it can be pretty affordable to get your hands on some of the software, and even some of the expensive stuff. You know, if you ask about educational licenses or discounts, they generally will have some to offer. So it never hurts to ask and to inquire. So, turning to some of the projects that we've worked on, Hastings Community Center is kind of the first big scan project we did when we got the scanner. This was a building, it's just such a story of demolition by neglect. So Hastings was a small town, and it ended up dissolving, and the county took over this building. And they just don't want to deal with historic resources, so they had to knock it down. But it was a long time coming, unfortunately. So this building was built in the 1920s during, it was like WPA project, and it was listed on the National Register because of the architect who built it and the style, and you know, a couple different things made it significant. And they used it, you know, the community used it probably up till the 70s. And then, you know, they took the windows out, and then they took the roof off, and then, you know, the shell of the building was just not deemed stable enough to bother trying to fix up. So, so we ran out before they demolished it, and at least documented what was there. This had never had Habs Hair architectural drawings done, which, you know, it's good to collect this information about the sites. So we were able to do laser scanning in basically like 2 days, and create a point cloud and a model. And you can create scaled images that you can put into CAD programs that really quickly be able to do the architectural drawings from that. So, so this building was demolished, and so it wasn't at risk from the stereotypical climate change things we may talk about here, but it was definitely, a threatened site and is now no more. So, but it's cool, we have the model posted online so people can go and look at it. And then you'll see there's like little circles with numbers. Those are annotations that we've added that actually pull up some historic photographs of what the building looked like through different periods of time. So, it's something the community can go and still like look at and explore the building. And that's, one of the cool things you can do with the technology. So we started with that project and got excited. And then, we decided we wanted to try using the technology on different types of sites. So we got some funding to help additional support for our HMS Florida program. And this included doing laser scanning at 12 different archaeological sites across the state. We picked, I think we picked like 15 that we tried to go out and work at. But one of the things that's good to keep in mind is you can't laser scan at every single site because it sometimes doesn't make sense. So some of the sites were like Civil War earthworks, and they just had so much scrub vegetation over them, you couldn't even really see the landscape. And so the laser scanner, it can't cut through vegetation like LiDAR does. It goes till it hits something and then it returns. So all it was doing was documenting the vegetation on top of the landscape versus getting the lines. So, you can't use this technology at every site, but there's probably some other, technology that might make more sense for documenting. So we picked kind of a different, different sites, different site types. So we had, historic earthworks and indigenous earthworks. Pictured here, we have a dam in the top left that was cut in like the old riverbed that went through. Shell midden that was kind of on a relic dune in the top right. Below that is a mound. And then in the bottom left corner is the House of Refuge. So it's a historic structure that was put on top of a shell midden. So really interesting multi-component site with a big seawall right on the ocean. So and, we were able to get some really good data about the sites and create some pretty cool deliverables. You'll see we made a topographic map that shows kind of the elevations of the Fort Pierce Mound and Midden, and that was something that had never really been done for that site. So Bulow Plantation was another site we worked at. It's a sugar mill that's here in Flagler County in Northeast Florida. Huge structure. I think we ended up having... You learn a lot about what to do and what not to do. So we actually did this scanning twice to get the best data that we could, but it took us about 4 days to collect all the data. This is a big structure. It's built out of coquina, which is the native limestone that we have here. That's like a shell conglomerate. So it's very porous and is, it erodes really quickly and can, so the site's definitely changing. And there's been a lot of hydrological change in the area as well. So there's a lot of just standing water in places that there wasn't standing water before. So it was a good site to document. And then, once again, from this, we were able to create the point clouds and the models. We were able to create, you'll see there's like a scaled image here that shows a site plan of the structures. And then doing topographic maps. And we really learned, you could see where water would stand and where water wouldn't stand, in the low spots on the landscape, but making the topographic maps and then actually printing the model was really enlightening to understand just how low those sites were. Cause we're scanning the structure, but you're getting the whole landscape around it as well. So the model, I had to put a base on the bottom of it. And when I was first attempting it, I didn't have a deep enough, like a high enough base. So there's actually holes in the model. It was like, oh yeah, that is really low. So that was interesting to kind of learn a little bit more about the site through that method. And then this is another sugar plantation, sugar mill that we were able to scan. And one of the really cool, you can just, manipulate the sites and look at them from different aspects with the data, which is really amazing. So one of the things that's great is to take the texture off of the models, and it can help you see, what's actually there. So you can see much clearer the sugar run and the walls that are left when you don't have all of the noise of the vegetation and the grass and all that kind of distracting you. We do this a lot with headstones too. If you can't quite see the engraving, you can take the texture off and it helps that pop a little more. So it's a really useful tool for kind of visualizing and looking and thinking more in depth about some of these sites. We did scan Shellbluff Landing with that first grant, but we got a second grant project that we were just wrapping up, some funding from the National Estuarine Research Reserve Science Collaboratives system. And so we had the People of Guana grant, and this included, monitoring and looking at shorelines, but also doing more of this documentation with the laser scanning of both the archaeological sites writ large, but also some of the artifacts that we were finding. So Shellbluff Landing is this big, it's a 10.3 acre site, but the part where it has the densest, deposits of a 6,000-year-old shell midden and all this historic homestead sites. The little fence there has a coquina well that's from around 1800. This is, of course, the part of the site that's right on the intercoastal and is eroding like crazy. So we wanted to use the models to try to track some of the erosional change that we were seeing in a more quantifiable way. So we've scanned this site numerous times, but for the grant project, we were able to compare scans from October of 2022 and March of 2023. So what you see here are the two models that we've stacked, and we've run through Cloud Compare an analysis of the differences between the two models. And so it's showing in a scalar field, where the changes have occurred. So we can see, where the part of the bluff line behind the well, huge chunks have just like fallen down. And I think it's up to like a meter of loss that we're seeing in some of these areas. The big tree in the bottom right corner also fell over. So you can see it's, lit up because it's different between the two of them. So I'll say, as I say, you keep learning more and more as you do all this stuff. So we had a little bit of trouble. The best way to align the shorelines is to do it by GPS, or to have either permanent on-site thing like markers that you can know you're lining the models up correctly, or to use GIS. And the GIS, I'm still trying to figure out what exactly I've done wrong, or they didn't quite line up. So we did kind of nudge these into place because we still had, some trees that we knew were in the same spot, or the well that was in the same spot. But we did a couple other shorelines with this project that there's nothing there to help make sure you have it aligned. And so we'll continue working on these methods and refining them, but it's a good first start for some of this. This is a second shoreline we did called Wright's Landing, and this is just a giant site with tons of, used for 6,000 years. But there's this dense layer of midden kind of on top of these relic dunes. And so these are the two models for March of 2022 and November of 22. And you'll see, the tree circled in the pink fell. So the newer model is actually a shorter portion of the shoreline because the tree fall and the vegetation got in the way to try to scan the same amount. But we were able to do that cloud to cloud comparison with this site as well, using the trees to make sure our models were nudged in the right spot. So this is kind of a different visualization of the same technique that we used in Cloud Compare. And you'll see the blue is kind of negligible, insignificant change. It's less than millimeters even. But some of the greens and yellows get, between 25 and 50 centimeters of shoreline erosion that we're seeing there. So cool way to help track and do some measurements. And, once again, I think the visualization of some of the 3D data can really be important and impactful in talking about the work that we're doing and the changes that we're seeing. I also wanted to highlight the Marshall Tunnel project. So this is a project we worked with Data Investigations and got a grant through Virginia DHR. So this is up in Botetourt County, up in the mountains of Virginia. And it's a canal tunnel for the James River and Cowanut Canal that it was never finished. It was kind of the highest up that they were canaling the James River for easier navigation to get things down. And so this, because it was never finished, it's kind of a more interesting site than some of the finished tunnels, because we can actually kind of see the construction in progress. So it's about a 400-foot long tunnel, and the very back of it, kind of, you can see it gets shortens, and it's the working surface where the folks were there, digging out the bedrock. And so we were able to kind of isolate and look. There were footprints that we are interpreting due to the shape and the size of them to potentially be, the workers' footprints. And there are these big ruts from carts where, the thought is that they were pulling the sediment down, putting it in the ruts, and then kind of dumping it. And then there's a lot of sediment that's infilled, so we don't know if there are more ruts or if they put tracks down to kind of haul things out of the tunnel. But it was pretty cool to see. So the site is on private property, so it's not one that the public can go visit. So creating the model allows other people to see it and to investigate it and learn about this period and this big undertaking that happened in Virginia. I guess, I hang out with Brendan Burke, who just knows everything. And he's just like, oh yeah, that canal project. And then I talk to other folks and they're like, wait, what? So I think it's a great way to teach people about a really interesting part of Virginia's history. So that was a cool project. And then, as I say, now we have the model. And so, if something happens or to the site, we'll have kind of a very thorough documentation of it at this point in time. And we could go back and monitor the site, through these methods to see if there's more sediment building up, or to see if things are eroding, or there was some pretty unconsolidated rocks above head. So I'm sure at a certain point, some of that will fall and definitely change what the site looks like. So, and we also do a lot with drones. So, any photos that you get that overlap, you can put through the photogrammetry software. So drones can be great to do kind of bigger landscapes, or so we have a pier here that was at the GTM Research Reserve where the People of Guana project was, or Brendan likes to send me data from Virginia to play with. So here's some he took at there was a dam that they pulled down, and the river levels went down, and they were able to find and document old bridge piers. And there was a boat that was, run aground and sunk there, and a couple of other features. So it was interesting to work with clear water where you can see through it and see features in it. But he took that footage in like an hour, and then you can process it through, and you're able to create, a nice ortho mosaic that you can do a sitemap off of. And so that's kind of a great way to, if you only have an afternoon to go out and document a resource, you can go and take a bunch of photos, and then go back, back at the ranch and make all of your maps and drawings and such from the data. So, always thinking about how to get the most bang for our buck and get the most information and data we can. When we encounter artifacts while monitoring, we definitely take photos of them and log them and try to document and record what's there. There's plenty of sites that we've gone out to monitor that we had no diagnostic information. It's a shell midden, but, continuing to go back, we'd start to, now we found some, St. John's pottery, or now we found, a bone, whatever. So, you're always learning more about these sites. So the static photos are great, but there are obviously, some limitations of them. You can only see the one angle. So especially working with volunteers, they take a picture of the pretty side of the pottery and maybe not the paste or the curvature or the maker's mark on the back. So there's, things like that are great to capture. You can kind of get a sense of scale, but it's still not the greatest. So creating the 3D models of the artifacts can really let you look at them much closer and do a lot more analysis of them. We don't collect artifacts. We don't really want to do that. The artifacts that we're seeing while monitoring are the ones that are on the surface, so they're not going to have the best provenience or context. It would involve getting permits. We don't really want a volunteer to start collecting artifacts in any capacity. And, there's that little thing called the curation crisis as well, right? But occasionally you go out and you find like that bone pin that it's just so amazing. And it's, you leave it, but it's hard to leave it, you know. So doing what we call catch and release has been a really great way to document those artifacts and to get the information and curate it in a way that doesn't take up as much space, but also not have to deal with the actual physical collection. So we've kind of had an evolution of our techniques. And when we first started doing this, we took a lot of bad photos and a lot of bad data, and the models didn't quite align. But we've really learned a lot and kind of perfected our technique in the field. Here's a homage to Emma and her ever evolving setup. So, but you can get, really great objects where you can see, once again, you can manipulate them. And I know it's not the same as holding it in your hand, but it's much better than just looking at 2 or 3 questionable photos of an object. And really you can get a lot of information. We're working on analyzing some of the historic ceramics that we documented during the People of Ghana project. So it's very similar, of course, to what you do in the lab, except you don't have a perfect light box set up where you can control all of the parameters. But we do take, photo scales and tripods, and we have all sorts of crazy backdrops and things, props that we use to try to get the photo. As I say, lighting is kind of one of the biggest issue, but you can really get, like, this is a photo we took in the field, but to see the setup that we had to get the photo was a little elaborate and crazy, and we'll often have, making shade to get the right lighting and all. But so for the People of Ghana grant, we were able to document artifacts from 4 different sites. We largely did this kind of while we were doing the laser scanning, because it takes a bit of time to hang out and do laser scanning at the shoreline. So this was something that we could do while that was happening. So we found artifacts at 4 different sites. We documented about 68 of them with the completed models, and we have them curated in Sketchfab if anyone is interested in going and taking a look. And as I say, we're working on doing artifact analysis of these objects as we close out that project. So we've also worked with legacy collections, so privately held collections. The Eyster collection is a big one in the Florida Keys. This gentleman went and poked around and did some archaeology before it was really quite archaeology, but it was before the development. And his daughter now has the collection, but it's one of the largest collections of artifacts from the Keys. And there's, it's not insignificant, but it's privately held, and the woman may or may not donate it, who knows what will happen with them. So we went and documented, a selection of the artifacts. And now, we can see them and share them with others. And they actually went into an exhibit as well. So we printed them, and I have some very talented colleagues who can do, I keep joking, I'm like, you could just have a side gig here to fund your archaeology habit of doing some replicas and some art forgery, because they just did such a great job of recreating the look of the artifacts on the 3D printed artifacts, right? But they're in an exhibit. It's an old railroad car, so it's not the most secure. It's definitely not climate controlled. But the 3D prints are perfect, because then, if something happens to them, it's fine. We can make new ones, and the real ones are still safe. So the Coontie Island collection is another collection that we documented it's a similar situation where these were collected from a site in St. Augustine in the 1920s and 30s, and the shoreline was eroding, and they talk about taking oyster rakes to go just comb the eroding shoreline, and they were finding projectile points that were 10 inches large and tons of stone beads. So it's a really amazing collection, and it's a collection that is kind of this local legend. People know about it, but no one's ever really seen it. So we worked with John and Danino at Eastern Kentucky University, who's a fabulous lithics expert. And so he tracked down the descendant who owned the artifacts. She lives in Bozeman, Montana. So we went to Montana and we digitized the collection, and he did an analysis and more. There's a publication coming out if you're interested in learning more about that. But it was pretty amazing to be able to kind of bring the collection back to the community digitally. And, there's a lot of interest in it, and people were very excited to be able to see the objects. And we've done some 3D prints of them and things like that. So just another exhibit that we've done. Once again, the 3D prints can be a great option if you don't have a secure location, or, this is at a state park in the Keys. Things happen there, storms happen, flood happens. So putting the actual Guerrero artifacts in was probably never going to happen. So we were able to work with some folks at the Mel Fisher Museum to print and paint artifacts to put them on display there. So just to summarize, I think there's a lot of great benefits from doing the 3D documentation. You can get out and rapidly collect a lot of data, generally very accurate, and you can create a lot of really cool deliverables. The accessibility of the data, we're able to share. As I say, I send stone tools that we find, I'll send the models to John in Kentucky, and he can, look at them and analyze them and tell me where the church's from even a lot of time. So it's a great way to share data. And, curating things digitally has less of a physical footprint. You can put a lot more on a hard drive than you can trying to worry about bankers' boxes and such. So it's, maybe not the solution for everything, and it's definitely not replacing some of that physical collecting, but for sites that, what else are we doing? If we're not doing anything else, it can be a great way to get a little more data, a little more information. I also think it's interesting, when we go do archaeology, we usually have our research questions in mind, and we try to do the best way of just collecting kind of blanket data about sites, but we're still looking at the sites and thinking about them through the lens of what we're trying to learn. So I think, doing things like the shoreline scanning and can help, other researchers who may have a slightly different research question in mind kind of look at the site a little differently in the future as well. So, and of course, the public outputs are really important. I think, to be able to see some of these sites, to be able to take people to some of them, or hand them some of the 3D printed objects of things that, I could never just take to a school classroom and pass around. That's really powerful. That's, I think one of the most compelling parts of archaeology is the physical nature of the places and the items. So to be able to show people or hand them things really kind of helps us do our work, and helps us, interpret the sites and talk about them. And I think helps people understand as well and connect. There are plenty of constraints. As I say, it's not always feasible at every site. So thinking about, what your site is and what the best type of technology is crucial. The cost of entry, be it, the actual like money and resources that you have to get. But also, I spend hours and hours trying to figure out, troubleshooting data and figuring out the best way to collect it. And so it does take time to learn all of these things and to figure out, what you're doing. And so it's not, all I say, it is something that you can jump into, it's like getting the perfection and learning the next step, and the next step can be some time investment. So lack of curation standards, that's kind of an interesting thing. Since I've been doing this kind of work, Sketchfab has been around, and it's been a great way to host and post and share the 3D models. But before that, it's kind of the Wild West of trying to figure out how to share any of this with people. So, we are seeing some standardization, but still, I give, like, the state of Virginia, I'm going to hand them a hard drive with all the 3D data, and I'm sure they'll be like, cool, and it'll just go live on a shelf somewhere, because everybody is still, still getting into this and understanding and learning, what these things are. So just making sure that we're thinking forward and curating things in a way. So, when we send off data, we don't just send the final object, we'll send, all of the photos and all of the laser scans. So even if, something happens with that, the final object file or the program that we use to create it's not there, you at least have kind of that raw data to rebuild and reprocess some of that. So, and also just to acknowledge the digital carbon footprint of everything that goes with technology. So we are expending carbon right now, being on a Zoom and having videos and talking, and just to acknowledge that and think about that and consider that in our work, because there's always ways to advocate for clean energy and more renewable energy, and and working towards that, but that, you know, we are still contributing to the cause. So always keeping that in mind. So with that, I'm going to put some links to some of the work in the chat, and then I can take questions, comments, heckles.